Good afternoon and welcome to our Hub24 webinar, which will focus today on advisor mental health and wellbeing, and in particular a recent study that shines light on the way forward for better mental health outcomes. In the session that we'll have today, we'll be talking to the eLab founder and human performance researcher, Dr. Adam Fraser, and he'll unveil key findings from the Australian Financial Advisors Wellbeing Report published in 2021. And this was conducted in collaboration with Deakin University and sponsored by AIA Australia. I'd be unfair if I wasn't going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the background of Dr. Fraser, because it's truly impressive. Dr. Adam Fraser is a peak performance researcher who helps people strive to achieve better performance in everything they do. He has worked with elite athletes, sporting teams, special forces soldiers, and also business leaders. What is unique about the research that he has conducted? He focuses on how people go beyond their potential without the collateral damage that normally comes with elite performance. Dr. Fraser holds a degree in biomedical science, a PhD in biomedical science from the University of Wollongong. I'm going to revert and refer to him as Adam so I don't get too tongue-tied. Adam, welcome today and thank you so much. Great to have you on board to discuss the paper and your findings.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be invited. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. So, starting point, I understand a financial advisor asked you to help or partake in this study. Can you give us a bit of a background on one, how it came about that you ended up in looking at the financial advice sector in particular for this body of work?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was doing a keynote at a dealer group conference. I think we're in Port Douglas. And so I did my usual keynote and presented and talked about the work we were doing. And afterwards, people tend to come up and have a chat, but I was literally bailed up by about 6 advisors. And they're all kind of guys in their mid-50s, and they just came up and said, hey, that stuff you do with other groups, you got to do that with us. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we're really struggling. Like, we're not coping with all the things that's going on. And they started to talk about, you know, how many suicides that had happened that year, which I found incredibly shocking because I didn't know anything about that. But I mean, this is typically a group that doesn't really ask for help. And these guys were very vulnerable and open. And one of the guys actually followed me to the car that was taking me to the airport. And he kind of put his hand on my shoulder and went, you're going to do this, right? Like, you're going to do this. And it was just a real cry for help. So I came back to my office and I spoke to Deakin University and we started to scope out what we could do. And obviously the big stumbling block was we needed someone to fund it. And we spoke to a few different people in the industry and we kind of got, oh yeah, possibly answers, but we sat down with AIA and you know, we literally didn't even get to finish the sentence. They just went, oh yeah, we'll fund that. Like, it was the shortest meeting of my life. And yeah, and that's how it came about.
And it's interesting you mentioned they're not a group of people that you'd found were used to asking for help. Often their role in life is giving help and giving support to people who have challenges ahead. So it's kind of almost the perfect storm for a group of people who would be maybe holding back in expressing some of their concerns.
Yeah, and it's a combination of the gender piece, like men don't often ask for help or admit that they're not coping, but advisors take that role of helping their clients very seriously. And one thing I learned is there's all different types of advisors, but the thing they have in common is they're incredibly passionate about their clients and helping their clients. And we've had some experience with these kind of helping professions where we've studied school principals and nurses, paramedics, and yeah, fallout of the fact that they care about people so much is they tend to leave themselves last.
So were some of your expectations maybe early on in the study the same as what you thought you were going to get from some of the groups you mentioned before? Did you expect something different to come from financial advisors versus other professions?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. As researchers, we try not to go in with expectation, well, particularly our type of research, which is called action research, where we study real world groups. And usually with an experiment, you have some sort of hypothesis and you set out to prove it. With the type of work we do, we don't go in with a hypothesis or an expectation. the purpose of this study was just to understand what was the current state. And as you said before, with the compliance being their number one stress, like no one in the industry goes, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. But what we wanted to do was actually put data to, is it just a narrative that happens in the business and there's no like basis to it, or is that the actual problem? And so when I went into this, obviously, I've spoken at a lot of advisor conferences, so I know them quite well, but I tried not to go in with an expectation. And really, we try to achieve three things. Number one is, what's the current state of mental health and wellbeing for advisors in Australia? That's the first one. The second one was, well, of the ones that have good mental health and wellbeing, what do they do? What are their behaviors and characteristics? But the third and the most important thing that we did was we started to look at, okay, this industry, like you guys have been the Olympians of change. Like you've experienced change on every single front, even like how you get remunerated, policy, the whole bit. So what we wanted to look at is people that were nailing it, like their businesses were flourishing and growing and evolving. We wanted to understand what those high performers did, like their behaviors, their mindset, like what we didn't want to do is do a study and go, yeah, you're all screwed and, and you got terrible mental health. Good luck with that. We wanted to actually go, well, here's what people with great well-being do, but also here's what people that are evolving their business do. So that were the three focuses for us.
That's great. Prior to the presentation you were doing, had you had much experience of financial advisors up to that point? So did you know who these people were or what they were like?
Yeah, I'd presented at a boatload of conferences over the years, and with those things, often wearing cans or we're somewhere, I went to Fiji with a group, so you hang out with them. And one thing about advisors is they love to have a good time, so you're hanging out and you're having a couple of drinks with them and you get to know them really well, and a lot of them are really characters, so you enjoy their company. So I've spent a lot of time not only crafting presentations for them, but just having conversations with them. However, probably the biggest thing is that I really value financial advice, and that's not me sucking up because we're doing this podcast. I've had a financial advisor for, 25 years, and he's one of the most important relationships I have. And a mate of mine, I had a mentor, and he's like, the first thing you got to do is get a financial advisor. And I went, well, I don't have any money. I'm a uni student. He goes, that doesn't matter. It's about habits. It's about mindset. So my financial advisor has had a dramatic impact on my life and my stability and, my ability to have financial freedom. And, I encourage everyone to have one because it's such an important thing to understand and work on.
We might just have found the poster child or the poster boy for the advice industry. That's fantastic to hear.
That's a sad sign for you guys, yeah.
So in terms of the report, maybe it's jumping too far ahead, but I'll kind of try and dig into a little bit more. So what were the drivers of mental or poor mental health and well-being in advisors? What started to come out from your study in the report?
Yeah, it's a big question because it's a big report and we looked at a boatload of different constructs and areas. Look, you talked about expectations before. One of the things that shocked me is that we compared the well-being, mental health, work-life balance, like all these areas to different people we'd studied over the years. So we compared them to partners in professional services firm like a KPMG or a PwC, home loan lenders, principals, bank executives, paramedics. And what we showed is that as a group, they scored worst on everything.
Really?
So if you think about that list, like that's not a bunch of people that are sitting around doing nothing. Like that's some stressed out people. So advisors had worse mental health, worse well-being, highest levels of stress, highest feeling of overload, as well as the impact of stress was really high, making them think about leaving the profession, causing medical problems, low rates of innovation, low rates of work-life balance. So what was really shocking is that they were the lowest out of all those groups. So
did you get a sense that you talked about, you know, us being Olympians of change? Did you get a sense that it wasn't just the volume of change, but the prolonged change that has that impact? So, you know, is it death by 1,000 cuts as well that started to come through?
Yeah, Greg, I think that's a fascinating. Yeah, just as a researcher, I'm trying to think, how do I put like data or accuracy to that? I mean, if you look at what we're going through with COVID, one of the challenges is most businesses have actually coped really well, but what we're struggling with is that fatigue of we've just been in this highly anxious, uncertain state for so long. And I think the same thing with advisors. Look, I'll say a couple of things. Actually, I'd like to get your perspective on this, because you know this group so well and you really get in the trenches with them and help them work more effectively. But there's a couple of things. Number one, they're actually quite a wounded group. And when we sat down and spoke to people, one of the things that hurt them the most was how they've been portrayed, how people have this kind of certain view of them because of things they hear in the media. And also, you know, what advisors reported was this feeling of, well, we're all bad and the regulators are coming in to try and clean us up. Like, we have to be micromanaged in that area because we can't be trusted. And I think on an emotional level, it's very damaging for them, because number one, they're incredibly dedicated. Number two, they think their job's very important, like, and it is. But so there's this emotional wounding that's happened from how they've been portrayed, how they've been treated, and also what they said is a lot of stuff from the regulators wasn't a collaborative process. It was just, well, brace yourself, here's what's going to happen to you. So it wasn't, let's work together because this is a really important industry. It was more, well, we're coming in and just brace yourself for all this change. So a lot of these people were wounded emotionally. So you've got, 10, 15 years of relentless change tied with my character has been attacked. And those two things coming together is one of the reasons why they're having such poor mental health and well-being. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I certainly agree with that. I think that, you know, the advisors that we see as just such a resilient and brave group of people, because, you know, this might be a generalization, but at its essence, these are people who have taken the chance to back themselves, often, running small businesses, but, you know, quite big and profitable small businesses. And some of the things that we've seen with that is that, you know, there's a bit of isolation. They're usually at the peak of their own organisation. They're the principal, they're the owner, they're the major shareholder. And in some cases, the people who they're most likely to share their views with, they could be competing with, which might be, you know, the advisor down the path or the like. So I think what we've seen is that we get tremendous access and we have great relationships with them, but there's some uniqueness about the nature of the advisor, whether affiliated with a big licensee or a boutique licensee, that adds to that. So yeah, we've certainly seen that change over time. You know, there's been lots of regulatory change, which has been an absolute, I guess, boon for advice, because that's, you know, the nature of, you know, finding what does this change to the superannuation or the tax laws mean. That's been a bread and butter of the industry for some time as to where we can do our best work. But I think the sort of changes that we've talked about here, which are more structural around, not directed at legs and regs of superannuation or the like, but actually the structure of the advice industry, have been a very different set of changes.
Yeah, and it also massively impacts on how they work on a day-to-day basis, where they spend their time. And something that came out of the interviews a lot was, well, all this regulation means that advice is getting more expensive, so I can't help the people that I really want to help. Like, I'm having to focus on more high net worth individuals rather than, you know, people that have poor habits around money, or people that really need to look after their future. So I just think, you know, this group's been hit on so many levels. It's kind of a perfect storm of
the wrong changes.
Yeah.
What did you find in terms, of demographics and age and gender education? Were there any differences based on those backgrounds on the wellbeing that you saw through the study?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you alluded to it earlier, is we found a group that we called the Thrivers, and these were people that had great well-being, were highly engaged in the role, were growing their businesses, but also were really enjoying the process. So we tried to understand what made that group come about. And one of the things we looked at was demographics. So what we found is age had very little bearing. And what that demystifies is that narrative of, oh, those older advisors are stuck in their ways and don't want to use technology and all that. It's not true. Like, age had little bearing on anything, even level of education. And I mean, like, when you left school, do you have a diploma? Do you have a degree? Length of experience didn't have a lot of impact. There were a few little things, like the longer you are in the industry, you tend to have better mental health. Like, if you're a bit newer, you're finding it harder. Location didn't really. Gender didn't have a huge influence. Like, what was interesting about gender is women are equal to men, except in two areas where they're better. And that is, they engage in more industry support, so they collaborate and just network with people better, and they're more likely to embrace change and do personal development. So one thing you can say from our study is that women are making the industry better, and that's just a cold hard fact. One thing that was very interesting is that two things that really made an impact: the state of your business. So if your business is growing and improving, everything's better for you. Your mental health, your work-life balance, stress levels. So that's a key factor. And how engaged your clients are was a huge one, because the question we asked is, if you think about your client base, where would you rate them on a scale of engagement? And the higher, more engaged your clients were, also the better everything was. So we're not sure how that relationship works, like, is it chicken or the egg? But so the two things that did influence were a little bit your experience, but your state of business and how engaged your clients were was very important.
Right, and that'd be, I think that client engagement part would very much go back to your earlier point, which is there's certain clients that advisors have identified that they can afford to serve. And those clients are very engaged with their financial futures. And then there's those groups I'd like to engage more with. And I guess as it goes back to that earlier point of, we want to help as many people as we possibly can. And if some clients that you can't engage with because there's distractions of compliance, or there's distractions, and compliance isn't a distraction, but I guess the coping with the volume of change can be a distraction. That really does make sense, because something that we've seen is that I've never met an advisor who said, I don't want to help people or take on more clients, but I think they also have this challenge of, I have an obligation to be profitable and to be here for the longer term. And I think those two are definitely running in conflict at the moment. And, we've talked separately around some of the things that technology might bring to help with the engagement of those clients when it might not be in the face-to-face is certainly an area that we're looking at.
Yeah, and while we're talking about that, one thing, and we'll get to this probably in a moment, but one of the characteristics of Thrivers were they were just excellent at where they spent their time, how they used their time, leveraging resources, outsourcing things. They were just really great at managing that chaos. And what they were exceptional at is, where is my time best spent? And what do I enjoy about the role, and how do I outsource that or streamline or put a system in place for that one? It was something that they were really, really good at.
Before we go into the Thrivers, do you remember, you probably will, but how many advisors were actually surveyed and how many fell into the Thriver category ultimately?
So we So there was 3 parts to the study. One part was the survey, which 1,000 advisors started.
1,000.
1,000. We got close to 800 complete, because it's a 20-minute survey and people get 15 minutes in, they get a phone call and they never get back to it. So we've got data on 1,000, but complete data on close to 800. And the second part of the study was we looked at a subset and we said, let's study them in depth. They filled out the survey, but they also did a 7-day diary study. So for 7 days, at multiple points of the day, they were writing down what they were doing, where they were spending their time, how do they feel, what was their mental state like, and then they did an interview with a researcher from Deakin University. So within that more detailed subset, there was about 44 thrivers. Actually, I think it was close to 40 thrivers. I don't have that number in front of me, but I think we interviewed in total about 43, and it was around 40 were identified as thrivers. So that's who we studied there.
And that's really quite a detailed study. Like this. The commitment advisors have had to make to do a diary and really participate. The data must be exceptionally rich that's come out of that.
And this is like one of the things we do with our research is not just send out a short little survey. It's a survey made up of validated constructs, so that it's a university quality research document. But going that deeper layer of diary study interview really starts to pull apart the understanding of what makes them tick and what makes them do it differently. What was funny is every one of them went, a 7-day diary study, you got to be kidding me. Like, they were not wild about it. But we're 3 days in, we're getting emails from people going, oh man, this is the best thing I've ever done. Because they were sending me emails going, I didn't realize how many times I got interrupted, or I didn't realize I spent so much time on regulation and compliance. And one of the things we found out about thrivers is they were spending like 90% less time on regulation and compliance than the people who are struggling, because what they did is they had systems, or they outsourced it, or so they were just participating in the parts that they had to participate in. What they were really great at is going, well, I can get someone else to take care of that, or I can do that, or I'll put some technology in place to massively streamline that process. So
So is it too simplistic to assume that if there's a compliance issue and if there's a compliance burden and they've got better systems to outsource that, and the thrivers had a diminished level of stress, is it that simple to say, oh, the answer is that you outsource that, or is there something more broad that the thrivers did that resulted in them managing the stress differently or better than the broader cohort?
Yeah, you're asking a big question, and I'm just thinking, how do I answer that succinctly without the use of a flip chart and a diagram? But if you look at what makes the thrivers tick, there were 7 key things. And look, the outsourcing and streamlining and systems is obviously a critical one, but that was one of the factors. One of the other ones, and this was kind of the biggest thing, and here's how I explain it. If you think about our behavior when we respond to any sort of challenge, what drives our behavior is the story we create about the situation we're in and the emotion we feel. So if you think about COVID right now, so you've got some people who are following the rules and being vaccinated and doing all those things. Now, so their story is obviously, well, this is really serious. I've got to follow the rules. Vaccination saves lives. And as a result, they stay at home, they wear a mask, they check in, they get vaccinated. Now, you've got some people who are the opposite in behavior, where, they thinking COVID's a conspiracy and the government's trying to control them and vaccines kill you, or they use it to track you. So their story is obviously very different. So because they've got that story, their behavior is, well, I'm not going to follow the rules, I'm going to protest, I'm not going to get vaccinated. So the difference between those two groups is the story they create about the situation they're in. Cool?
Right. Yep, that makes sense.
Now, what we expected, and this was probably, for me, this was the most fascinating thing. What we expected is the people that were struggling would have a really negative story about the experience they've gone through, meaning the regulation is bad and unfair and we're frustrated by it. Whereas the thrivers would have a very different story of, well, this is good for the industry, or this is going to help me improve my business. What we actually found is the story for both groups is the same. So both groups were equally frustrated by the level of change. They said it's very stressful. They said it really, hampers my ability to run my business the way I want to run, or even the story of, actually, this could have been handled a lot better, and what's been in place hasn't been the greatest thing. They had the exact same story, but what the thrivers were good at is they just went, yeah, I know I feel this way and I know I have this story, but that story sometimes get in the way of me achieving my goal, or achieving, the outcome I want, or connecting to meaning and purpose. So I'm not going to let that story run my behavior. I'm going to be more driven by my goals and my values, even though I am frustrated at this. Whereas the people that were struggling, it was like that story just overwhelmed them, and so much of their time was spent being angry and being frustrated, but it impaired their behavior. It impaired their ability to evolve. It was more like, well, I shouldn't have to go through this. Why should I have to adopt and change? Whereas the thrivers were like, yeah, I'm not happy about this, but this is the situation I find myself in. How do I make the best of it? So that, for me, that was fascinating, because I thought the thrivers might be some sort of Pollyanna optimist, but they weren't. They just went, yeah, this sucks, but here's how I get on with it. Does that make sense?
It does. So can you recreate, or I guess the question is, for those that are not feeling like they're thriving, can you recreate, or how do you change that narrative or that story? Is it possible to change that story so you do go from, this is on top of me, to this is on a challenge, but I think I'm up for the challenge because there's a greater good ahead?
Yeah, it's interesting. Psychology is going through a real evolution right now, where what we used to think was we have to have positive stories and positive emotion to act well. Like that kind of, if you feel bad about something, change your mindset, change your emotion, and then you'll act better. Right? That was this very linear model of, you've got to have positive emotion. And now what we're looking at is, how do you have a more flexible relationship with your mind, where you can have a negative story and negative emotion about it, and you can almost put it off to the side and go, yeah, I know I feel that way, but this is a better behavior in this moment. Right. And so it's almost like what psychologists are looking at now is, regardless of your thoughts or emotions, what's the most constructive behavior you can do? And even if you look at like extreme athletes like a base jumper or a big wave surfer, those people go in and feel high levels of terror as they go into the activity, but they're able to put it off to the side and go, well, if I'm going to survive this, these are the behaviors I need to do. So it's very similar in that regard. Does that make sense? I know I'm talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So rather than advisors going, how do I change the story I have about the situation I'm in? It's much more about, what are the constructive behaviors? What are my goals? What's my meaning and purpose? What am I trying to achieve? And be guided by those goals and focuses, rather than I get pushed around by emotions and thoughts. And some days you're going to go, oh my God, why do I even bother with this thing? And I'm so frustrated. But yeah, okay, I'm going to have days like that, but I'm sticking to the system or process, or that's what I'm going to focus on.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for that. So I understand, that you've thought about and devised an intervention that you think that the industry can participate in. Can you tell us a bit more about that? There is a better way forward, and what that might look like.
Yeah. So what we've done is, if you look at those 7 things that we've learnt about advisors, that thrive. And just to be really clear, it's about having clear goals, being driven by meaning and purpose, being psychologically flexible, which we just talked about, looking after their well-being and doing things to prevent burnout or the buildup of stress. They engage in peer support, and also they streamline they're very good at managing their environment. So those were the characteristics of the thrivers. So what we've done is taken those and designed an intervention that teaches people these skills. Because the beautiful thing about the thrivers is they're all skills that you can learn. So what we've done is created an intervention that does that. So it's 4 workshops that they attend, and it's mixed with collegial support, buddy support. We look at behavior change. In each workshop that they do, they map out a really clear action plan around, well, here's the changes I'm going to make. They're held accountable for those. So it's not just education, but it's a whole process of behavior change and support throughout that. Support from us, support from their peers, and they form like a little tribe. The model that we're using is similar to what we've done in the past with other groups, and we're going to put small groups of advisors together, and they go through this process, and they become like this kind of tribe that supports each other and challenges each other, but supports each other. So that's what our focus is.
That's excellent. And I think it does get back to that breaking of isolation and being willing to step forward and share. And one thing I know about advisors is they're great innovators, and no matter what you come up with, I'm sure there'll be a version that's adapted based on the advisors and their experience. They're great innovators and planners for change.
Yeah, and how we've designed it is we've got advisors to weigh in and go, we kind of mapped out a plan, and we sat down with different advisors and went, what do you think of this? And they went, oh, that's crap, don't do that, or that's valuable, or that would really help. And part of it is also, part of the program is to give them time to think and reflect, whether it's about their leadership or whether it's about their marketing or strategy or where they spend their time, and to get challenged by me, by the other facilitators, by the people in the group. They want to walk away thinking, God, why do I spend so much time in there? Or am I the best person to do that? That's the experience we want people to have.
That's fantastic. Adam, we're coming towards the end of our time together. Is there anything that you'd like to share in addition to what we've talked about that you think that the many hundreds of people who are listening would benefit from?
No, I think my major message I want to give is just what those thrivers did, and people listening to this who work in the industry is getting them to think about, well, how am I tracking on this, or how am I tracking on that, or is that an area I need to work on? So I think just that personal reflection of, it is a tough gig, but we do know that some people really thrive in it. So learning those lessons and taking on what other people are doing is a really smart thing to do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. Look, we've come to the end. It's been such a pleasure to meet with you and spend time with you, and someone who equally believes in empowering better financial futures together as Hub does. We've had a couple of chats in the lead up to this, so I just think there's so much more we'll be able to cover going forward. To those on the line, there's continuing education points available. The paper, the research paper is available. I've read it, it's fantastic. I'd encourage everybody to do the same. I think there'll be a link posted for that. Finally, to those on the line, we'd like to thank you as attendees today, but also for the support and partnership that you have with Hub24 and bestowing your trust in us. And again, the sort of support that you give across the market. So thank you very much. And Adam, thanks again. Great work, and we love what you're doing.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you.